everyone. Pastor Will here. This is the Lectionary Bible study for this coming weekend, June 2nd, 2024, the second Sunday after Pentecost. And in our journey through the scriptures, we encounter profound insights into the nature of rest and its significance in our lives. The book of Deuteronomy, it lays out the foundation of rest, emphasizing that the Sabbath is a gift from God intended for the well-being of us all. However, as we dive into the New Testament, we see how even the most liberating practices of Sabbath and rest can be distorted into burdensome rules. Yet Jesus, in his ministry, offers this corrective lens to see rest in the Sabbath through. And it reveals the true essence of what it means to be a keeper of the Sabbath, this pathway of restoration and healing and wholeness for humankind. And so today we'll explore scriptures from the book of Deuteronomy and Paul's second letter to the Corinthians and the Gospel of Mark, to understand this transformative power of Sabbath in our lives. So we begin with Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verses 12 through 15, and Sabbath as liberation. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son, or your daughter, or your male or female slave, or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or any resident aliens in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So some key points about this first reading from Deuteronomy. We witness God's commandment here to keep Sabbath holy, and it's rooted in this experience that the Israelites had of their liberation from slavery in the land of Egypt. Now the Sabbath is not merely this religious obligation that you and I are called to uphold, but it's a divine provision of rest and renewal that extends even to the servants, even to the slaves and the foreigners within our community. And it underscores God's concern for this well-being, this holistic well-being of we human beings. God is inviting us here into this rhythm of work and rest that fosters physical and emotional and spiritual flourishing in our lives. Fosters the ability for us to live and be as we were created to live and be by God. So that is our reading from Deuteronomy. We'll move on now to 2 Corinthians and the treasures in jars of clay. Paul writes, "We do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. Paul's letter here to the churches in Corinth, it illuminates this paradox of Christian life, that we carry the treasures of God's light, these great treasures that are eternal and eminent and last, but we carry them within these fragile earthen vessels, these clay jars known as us, known as our humanity, known as our human fragile selves. And despite facing afflictions and hardships, Paul, he's emphasizing here in this letter that our sufferings are not in vain. You and I do not suffer in vain. Instead, our suffering is a backdrop to which the glory of God can shine forth. There's a purpose to our suffering. And this passage from Corinthians, it also reminds us that our human limitations, our vulnerabilities, they make us reliant, dependent on God and God's sustaining power for us. They teach us that our humility and dependence go hand in hand with our journey of faith, with our walk with God together. Finally, there's the gospel, and we begin a gospel series going through the 2nd through the 6th chapters of Mark for the next 8 weeks. But today we're in chapter 2 and go slightly into chapter 3, talking about the Lord of the Sabbath. Mark writes, "One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, 'Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?' And he, Jesus, said to them, 'Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and he gave some of his to his companions. And then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.' Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. This is the Pharisees watching Jesus. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, 'Come forward.' And then he said to them, 'Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?' But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him." So here in Mark's Gospel, we witness Jesus challenging these interpretations of the Sabbath laid out in the law by the religious leaders. And Jesus, he's asserting that his authority as Lord of the Sabbath, he's emphasizing the Sabbath was made for humankind's benefit, not to restrict humankind, but so that humankind can flourish and be made whole again. And that through his act of healing this man with the withered hand, restoring him to whole on the Sabbath, he is revealing to us what it means to keep Sabbath, to keep a day set apart for these acts of compassion and mercy and restoration, and not just to consume and to take, but to give back, to contribute to towards the good of the community. And so as we reflect on these three passages, we're invited this week to consider what it means to Sabbath, to truly rest under the embrace of God. It's not this rigid obligation that you and I have to keep as Christians, but it's an invitation, a gracious gift from God to enter into this restorative rhythm that God has had since the beginning, since creation, that God worked 6 days and rested, Sabbath on the seventh. And just as God's liberated God's people, the Israelites, from their bondage, so too does God offer liberation to you through this day called Sabbath and your practice of it. So may you embrace this gift. May you think about what it means to Sabbath and to rest all this week. And may you allow the Sabbath to transform your life, to become an agent of restoration, to be an ambassador of the kingdom, promoting what it means to truly rest, to truly be a human being in a world that longs so much for healing and renewal. Thank you so much for participating with me in this Bible study this week. Please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Venice, Florida. We'll see you this weekend in worship. God bless you. God is with you.